Hi, I'm a big fan of Deep Purple, and I thought, well, I'm a lifelong fan of the band, and I thought there's been a lot of talk of them recently with some newer fans, and a lot of people wondering, well, what about them? They have a long history. They've been around for 52 years, so they have quite the history. And so in this video, I thought I would look at sort of the classic period, if you will, from 1968 to 1976. Now, as I go through this, I do have to preface this. This is my opinion as a fan. This reflects my tastes. I know they have the different lineups and the different styles have different fans, but this is my honest opinion. So they started in slightly before, but they started the recording career in 1968, and for the first year or so, it was slightly progressive, slightly psychedelic, slightly quirky. They were trying to find a voice, and I love this period of recording. So let's just look at the first album, Shades of Deep Purple. This was released in 1968, and it was recorded in 3 days. And it has the original lineup of the band. So you had John Lord, Richie Blackmore, and Ian Pace, sort of the core members of the band at the time. And then you had Nick Simper and Rod Evans. I mean, at this point of the stage, they were, point in their history, they were all core members. But these three sort of carried on into future lineups. But anyway, this album is really good. It's psychedelic. It was a terrific debut album. It is of its time. So if you're going back, if you're expecting to hear something thumping like Smoke on the Water, forget it. There are a fair number of covers. Love Help, Hey Joe, Help by the Beatles. That's a really good version of Help. It's nice and slow and quite dramatic. And of course, Hush. Hush might be the song that you're familiar with off this album. It was most recently featured in whatever the Quentin Tarantino's latest movie is. Anyway, it's a great song, great cover, great solo by John Lord. So this is some good, heavy, psychedelic rock with some prog elements to it. Yeah, I like that quite a bit. So the next album, released, I think it was 1968 as well, later that year, The Book of Taliesyn. And, same lineup in the band. You had John Lord, Ian Pace, Richie Blackmore, Nick Simper, and Rod Evans. To me, this is not as good as the first album, but there are some very good songs on it. I really like on side 2 in particular, Shield and Anthem. Those are great. And there's also a great cover of Kentucky Woman. That was also on the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood soundtrack. But again, it's quite psychedelic. The second side, the first two songs in particular, are leaning towards more of a proggy element, which is nice, slightly more diverse palette. River Deep Mountain High, that's an interesting cover as well. But if I had to compare the two, I would take the first one over this. Now, the third album was released in 1969, and it was the last album recorded by this original lineup. Sort of after this album was recorded, John Lord, Richie Blackmore, and Ian Pace sort of decided that the other two weren't working out. These three wanted to move in a sort of a more, I guess, a slightly heavier approach, a more focused approach. And these guys were very good, but they just didn't fit that vision. Nick Simper's an amazing bass player, and Rod Evans went on to form like a really great prog group. If you want to hear some really great forgotten 70s stuff, check out Captain Beyond. But in any case, so these three kicked these two out after this album. And this is my favorite album of like of all three. It's it's darker. It's definitely more progressive. And let me take a look at the songs that are on it. Chasing Shadows is really, really good. Blind, like this is just me just talking about how good the songs are, but they're really good. Lelania, a Donovan cover, that actually is probably one of my top, I don't know, 10, if not top 5 John Lord organ solos. I love the solo on that song. Then you get a couple of Fault Line and The Painter. That's slightly more 60s stuff. It doesn't stack up, in my opinion, to the first three. And on the second side, White and Rosemary, that's interesting. There's a riff taken from an Elvis song, I think. And April, to me, is the standout song from that album. There's a I don't know if it's a full orchestra, but there's symphonic type music, classical type music, I guess, in a section. So it starts off, and yeah, it's a great song. Check it out. There's a really good video here on YouTube. It's really weird, but it's really good. I don't know. There's a string section playing in looks like a rock quarry or something. Weird. I think it was German, so that might explain things. But it's really good. So yeah, after that album, back to this sleeve, the three brought in a singer named Ian Gillan and a bass player named Roger Glover, and they had been in a band called Episode 6, which was also a kind of a 60s pop band. But the difference was that they're a little more thumping. And so after this album was recorded, they released an album with the new lineup. And although this was recorded live, I don't consider this a live album because oftentimes live albums are, well, I mean, when you think of a live album, it's somebody playing their studio songs live. But this is how it was recorded. It was recorded live and issued. There was never a studio version of this. And it was really good. It was composed by John Lord. And this is sort of the last chapter in the really proggy phase of the band for probably 40, 50 years. They've recently looped back around, and I'll discuss that when I talk about their more recent stuff. But this is great. Check it out. It's not a rock album. There's a lot of classical type of music, and it's tremendous. So these first 4 albums, if you're exploring Deep Purple, are the proggy phase. The band is experimenting. They're trying to find a voice. They haven't quite tried it yet, but it's really fun listening to them, see what they can do. Now I'm going to get the next group of albums and talk about that phase of the band.